You ready to get started?
I am ready. Thanks again for having me on, Landon. I'm
Dude, man,
pumped.
super excited for this. We're gonna be talking about a lot of cool stuff. I think you've seen a lot of the interviews I do. I interview a lot of people who are 30s, 40s, 50s, but
Yeah,
occasionally I bring on like very special 20 somethings that are doing amazing things. I do like to start with the beginning though. So usually
yeah,
the beginning can be college days, but we're gonna go back even a little further with you. So let's say like when you were 10 years old, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
yeah. First off, again, Landon, thank you so much for having me on the show today. For me, looking back when I was 10 years old, I grew up an athlete. I grew up in a small town in Virginia. I played hockey since I was 3 years old, all the way up until 13. And then I switched to lacrosse, and then I started playing football. But growing up, I was always driven by athletics. You always have these child ambitions to be a professional hockey player and to, shoot for the stars. And I totally had that growing up. But I think that as I was, even just going into middle school, and then of course going in high school, the business world sort of just fell into my lap by accident, which we'll get into just through a severe neck injury, which left me almost paralyzed. But growing up around 10 years old, I would say I was very ambitious to be a professional athlete and mainly playing hockey. But coming from a small town in Virginia, that was super rare. And I totally heard those things like, "Oh, that's not possible. That's not possible." But it was definitely an ambition of mine.
Of course, and it's not too late. Obviously, we could totally get there in the future for you in hockey, and I'm going to see that one day. Perfect transition, though. I mean, you just brought up the injury. I want to talk about uncertainty a bit. Us 20 somethings, we've had to deal with so much uncertainty over the past. I mean, how long has the pandemic been going
Yeah,
on? Like,
man.
no one knows what's going on. We're so confused about our futures. But through uncertainty, we can turn these negative opportunities into something bigger. So let's talk about that injury a little bit and what you were able to build from that.
Yeah, totally. So, I remember it so vividly. I was a sophomore in high school. It was my second year playing college. I said college, high school football, and I was going into my first varsity season. I was a running back, also playing slot, and you're so excited about the season ahead. And it was the first day of hitting practice where you're getting all your pads on, you're going down to the field, everyone's pumped up. That I ended up doing this one drill that I accidentally spun this guy. Then my helmet sort of popped off a little bit, and I landed on my back and slammed my head to the ground. And this is the story I always like to tell because I go to the doctor the next day, because it wasn't one of those injuries where I'm like on the field, can't
Mhm.
move. It was like I knew something was wrong. I go to sleep that night. I wake up and I can't even move my head in either direction.
Wow.
And go to the hospital, get some x-rays. And, me being this young 16 or 15-year-old kid at the time, super ambitious. I was like, oh, I'll be fine. Give me a couple weeks and I'll be back on the field. And I remember the doctor walked in. I'm with my mom and he says, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news is you're not paralyzed and, you can walk and continue your life and you'll be healthy and you'll recover from this. But the bad news is you have to be in a neck brace for 6 months and you can never play football again. And hearing that as a 15-year-old kid, it doesn't really process, right? Like you're in the moment, you're like, there's no way. And from that moment, walking out of the hospital, I mean, my life forever changed. And, just to dive into it, that injury led me to this 6 month hiatus where I was depressed, not sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I sort of, again, by accident, stumbled into this personal development, entrepreneurship, business space where I started learning about affiliate marketing and Facebook advertising and personal branding, which then led to podcasting. During these initial 6 months, I learned more from putting my head down or that's ironic. I couldn't put my head down because I was in a neck brace, but just staying focused and like figuring out what I wanted to do and following things I was super excited about, which was following people like Gary Vaynerchuk and Tony
Mhm.
Robbins and all these high level entrepreneurs. And we'll dive more into it, but through that process, I never looked back, and it just became my career and where my focus was, and completely changed my life during that 6 month period.
Wow, it's crazy hearing that like that accident happened during practice, first day of practice. I hate saying that everything happens for a reason, but I do occasionally say that things happen and we have a choice, what we do next. So during that 6 month hiatus where, you were not feeling good, you really were lost on what you wanted to do in life. Was it like one day where you woke up and said, okay, I'm really passionate about, personal development. I can be able to help other people. Or was it more accumulation over time that you came up with the idea to, kind of build your personal brand?
Yeah, it was definitely, and that's a great question, by the way. It was definitely a long journey of, it's like the domino effect, right? Like I remember seeing the first ad that like caught my attention was Ty Lopez. He was talking about the 67 steps, health, wealth, love, and happiness. And I, clicked on that ad and I went down this rabbit hole. And then I started following Gary Vee and he's talking about personal branding. And, it was really like over these 6 months where it wasn't that I wasn't like executing on things, but I was learning so much that as I was continuing to learn and dive into these books, I'm like, okay, I kind of have a game plan, right? Like, yeah, I want to start putting out content. I'm learning about advertising and marketing. What should my personal brand be? And I was writing all this stuff down. I have journals filled back home in Virginia, and it's so cool to look back on my 15-year-old self, sort of like game planning my personal brand. Because at the time, I didn't have a company, I didn't have a
Mhm.
track record, but I was living in this story that I wasn't even aware of at the time, where I was in this neck brace. I was learning so rapidly that I just started documenting my process and my journey and doing these book reviews on Snapchat. And over time, it was built into this personal brand that has shifted and changed so much over the last 4, almost 5 years now. But it was absolutely a journey of like self discovery, and moving out of 2016 going to 2017. That was the year that I was just executing on content, like the entire year of 2016 2017 leading towards the end is when I started my podcast, December 2017. And the whole idea and reason for starting the show was, like, hey, I've been putting out content, I've been meeting all these great people on social media, I'm starting to build this small following. I want to have more deep, intimate conversations with entrepreneurs and really learn the game, whether that's fundraising or building, starting, scaling, selling a company, and just overall like the entrepreneurial spirit. And it started off just, DMing friends of mine that I met that were my age, like my business partner now, Kieran, to my buddy Caleb Maddox. And I ended up just setting this ambitious goal after I got in touch with Gary Vaynerchuk. I was like, I want to do 60 interviews in 90 days. And I ended up knocking that out of the park. I was coming home from high school doing like 2, 3 interviews a day, like being obsessive in the DMs. And from that, just like hyper focused time, I became obsessed with podcasting. It opened up so many doors, and really moving into the year and the years ahead, it's became not only a huge part of my identity, but it's opened up 99% of doors regarding where I am today with MediaKits and what we've been doing, the round we raised last year, and just everything put together. And it was absolutely, going back to the key question, a domino effect, that I was just following different things and figuring out what I was great at and what I was excited about. And over the years, that led to what I'm doing now at MediaKits.
Of course, man. And I tell people all the time that like it's not necessarily about what you do, it's what you create. And you're an awesome creator. Like you've created so many amazing things. Just breaking down a few of these again, as you mentioned, you wrote a book, you've created killer content online. Of course, we're going to get to your company, but let's talk about this podcast a little bit as well. You've been able to speak with amazing people like Gary Vee, Larry King, Rick Ross is one of my favorite episodes as well. When it comes to personal branding, like what are your personal principles for building credibility on the internet? Because I've just been so impressed with what you've been able to do. And I think that you have so many lessons that other 20 somethings doesn't have to be at, the scale of yours, but like, how can we start to build credibility and a presence online?
Absolutely. No, another incredible question. When I really started focusing on personal branding and this idea of, like, building social credibility, I think there's two things I want to talk about. One's the advantage of being young and not
Mhm.
necessarily having this crazy track record where you get to build and shift your identity. But there's also a disadvantage where, if I was to talk about like the perfect way to build your personal brand, it's probably like, go build something incredible and then, people know you for that. But I was, this 17-year-old kid, didn't have a massively successful company before. I was just trying to build my craft. And I always talked about this one key principle, And it was build credibility by associating with credible people,
Mm,
and to do that very genuinely. And for me, it was through the podcast, right? Which started of just interviewing friends of mine and then led to the people, as you mentioned, like Larry King or Rick Ross or May Musk and all these incredible people. Starting very, very small, I was just so obsessed with getting out there. And I think this is super important, especially over the last 2 years of COVID and work from home, where, during the years 2017, 2018, 2019, I was going out to LA almost once a month when I was in high school. I was flying back and forth, spending like every dollar I made, just like, let me go to LA, let me go to LA, go to these events for people like Dan Fleischman, who's a mentor of mine. He was always
of
hosting
course.
these things called elevator nights. And he would always invite me to them. And, just to take a step back too, like I always tell people the hardest sale of my life was A, asking my parents to let me travel to California by myself when I was 17 years old to go to these type of events. But I was just extremely focused on getting out there, doing some podcasts in person, meeting great people, shaking hands, going to all these different events, that not only did the credibility build through that, but the real life experience and, just the fact that I was showing up. Like one story I always like to tell was I wanted to have Grant Cardone on my podcast, and I sent him a DM. I was like, "Hey Grant, would love to have you on the show." Did my little pitch,
Hmm.
and he was like, "Perfect. Email my assistant Katie, I believe her name was." I email her, and I was just like, "Let me just shoot my shot." I said, "Hey, I'll be in Miami next Thursday at 4 p.m. or I'll be in Miami next week from Wednesday to Friday. Would love to have Grant on my show and would love to come to the studio in person if it's possible." She's like, "Perfect. Just booked you at, Thursday at 3. See you then." And what people don't know about that was I had no plans to be in Miami. I've never been to Miami.
No
And
way.
I just was like, let me shoot my shot. Cause I read about this in actually one of his books, Sell or Be Sold.
Wow.
So I'm now like, oh God, I have to get to Miami. So I booked my flights to Miami with a couple of friends of mine. We go there. I'm missing 2, 3 days of school. I tell Grant this story as I'm interviewing him. He's cracking up. And I did the same thing for the mayor of Miami. And I saw you just interviewed him as well. He's
Yeah.
incredible.
Such a cool guy.
Um, Same thing. And I still use some of these tactics. I'm like, hey, I would love to do it in person. And they agree. And I get out there.
And
And I
then
think
figure it
that
out after. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's probably not the most scalable strategy, but in terms of just like getting in the room with people, I
Hmm.
think anyone can learn something from that, especially if you're young and you're trying to build your brand, build your credibility. It's like focus on showing up, whether that's in the DMs, pitching your podcast to someone or your company to investors. Um, and even on the flip side, like some of the investors we have for MediaKits in our pre-seed round came from a cold DM. And it's like just you have to show up, whether that's digitally in the DMs or posting content or physically and showing up to events and just being in the right rooms. I think if I was to summarize my answer to this question of how do you build credibility, it's A, showing up and doing the things and getting creative, but B, in terms of like social media and personal branding, it's just documenting those experiences, right? It's talking about them, right? Like this is a clear example, talking
Yep.
about this on a podcast, like letting people know, not only your expertise, but the stories that you have, because I'm a huge believer in just you learn through stories. And I think if we can all point to um, the people we admire the most, I read your thread today on Alexis from 776, and like that's a story, right? Like that hits home. And if you can just tell your story authentically, I think that's a huge way to build credibility. And if you do that over time, that's the best way to stack it.
Dude, I love that. You shared a lot of bars there. So, like, number one, like, being around credible people, super important. I completely agree. Showing up is really important. I love your points on like building in public also. I know you didn't coin it like that, but I mean, people think the
Yeah.
word building in public or the statement is only for tech people. I think we can all build in public, showing people updates. You do that so well. You didn't use this word specifically, but I mean, obviously, you've just done it so well with your career, consistency as well. And I related to a lot of the stuff you mentioned with getting guests. I mean, my guests have evolved over time. I mean, look, I'm speaking with you right now, and like
Yeah,
obviously, I
totally.
totally remember seeing your show like when I was getting started, and like this is like unbelievable moment for sure. Like have you on my show now because
I
like just
appreciate
thinking
that.
like you got to be
Your show,
consistent. You got to be
your show is
consistent.
incredible too, man. Like, I'm super impressed by you, and I love your shows, and I'm a huge fan as well. So
Thank you, man. That
thanks
means a lot.
for sure.
So now I want to change discussion a little bit. I want to specifically pivot and talk about pivots. I think that you pivot so well. You, of course, and we've spoken about a lot of this, book to podcasts to now, you are building a company, MediaKits, all like different matters, but like using, each one to like piggyback and like pivot onto something else. I think that's a skill that like needs to be acquired over time. Like some pivots make no sense, but everything I've seen from you so far with how you've been able to pivot makes so much sense. So I'm just curious, like, how have you mastered the art of the pivot? Because it
Yeah,
can be
no,
scary. I want to say, like, it can be
totally.
scary to totally do that, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I think just unknowingly, I've made so many different pivots, right? I think like just even giving people some context, whether that's where I live or the business venture that I'm a part of. As I said, I'm from a small town in Virginia, and right after high school, if you were to just talk about pivots, I pivoted and moved across the country, and
Yep.
I was part of this media company called Build Your Empire. We were doing some awesome events at this entrepreneurial type of house, right in the heart of Scottsdale, and I was a part of that company for 2 years, just we did dozens of events. That's how I met some of my early guests, like Drama from Young and Reckless and Rob Dyrdek and Robert Greene and all these cool people from just doing dozens of personal events. But like those events in that company, Build Your Empire, I might not talk about it or be a part of it today. But that's strategically, right? Because I made a pivot. And when you pivot, it's like, maybe you have to pivot your personal brand. You have to pivot where you want people to focus on. But I think for me, like pivoting from writing a book, from doing affiliate marketing on Snapchat to being a part of Build Your Empire to launching this tech startup, MediaKits, and even something as small as like my podcast name, right? Like I started my podcast, it was Rise of the Young for so long, and I feel like I outgrew it where I just shifted it to the Casey Adams Show, and I'm a
Mhm.
part of this cool podcast network called Blue Wire now, and they have a cool studio in Vegas that I record a lot of my shows at, and I was the first things first is pivots are scary, right? Like you're all in your head, and the moment you do it, it feels so good. And I think just speaking on firsthand, I think everyone can relate to when you make a big change or even a small change, it's very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I think this quote, people may say it's cliche, but you have to start being comfortable with getting uncomfortable. And I've said that to myself. I've consistently wrote it down in my journal since I was 16 years old. And whenever I feel like I'm getting comfortable and things are just flowing and my schedule's the same, I try to put myself in a position to be uncomfortable. Like even something as simple as like I used to run like 2 to 3 miles on average when I was to go on a run. And then I upped it to like 5 miles. And then really in like October, November, December of last year, I just felt like I was getting comfortable, right? Like, oh, running 2 miles to 4 miles, I can do it. It's not that much work. Where I'm like, I want to run a marathon, right? Because I think like challenging yourself physically is a great way to challenge yourself mentally that converts into the business realm. So now I'm training for a marathon and it's very
Wow.
uncomfortable. It's strenuous running, which I'm not the biggest fan of running. I just like it for the training and the mental aspect. But going back to pivoting, I think it's just like find where pivots make sense and like go all in on it. Like with MediaKits, right? Like not many people know this, but prior to MediaKits, I was kind of working on this podcasting startup called Podswipe. It never launched. I was just kind of like formulating the idea, trying to put it together. We didn't raise any money for it or anything. And then my business partner Kieran, we've had this idea for MediaKits for years, and it was really just during the pandemic when we were roommates back in 2020, where I was kind of working on this idea, and he's like, "Hey, like I think this is a great time to launch MediaKits. We should go and do this." And that's a big pivot to stop kind of what I was pursuing and what I was focused on to then say, hey, you're right. Like we've talked about this for years. The timing could not be any better. I feel like we complement each other with our skill sets. So I pivoted, and I think that as you mentioned, it's something that I sometimes do by accident or unknowingly,
Mhm.
but it is something that looking back on, I realize I've made many, 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 many pivots. And it's good for growth. It's good for like mental discipline to say like, hey, when you pivot, you like focus on it and build it and figure out if it works, stick to it. If it doesn't, pivot again. And I think that's something that everyone can learn from.
No, that's great advice, man. And I think that's a perfect pivot to talk about media kits. I mean, you also, and you didn't mention this, but I think you're the right guy to build this also. I mean, just like seeing like how the brand,
Thank you.
how big of the brand you've been able to build, like this is a good company for you. So media kits, you guys, and we spoke about personal branding, the importance of personal branding. You guys are building a new age resume digitally for creators to like really show their work their reach as well, to help them leverage more opportunities in the future, financial opportunities, like any opportunities for them to connect with brands. I mean, it's really cool that you guys are building like this new product. So I'm curious and would love to jump in and just kind of talking about like what you guys have built so far with MediaKits and what we can expect also
Yeah.
coming in the future.
Totally. No, I appreciate that. For those that may not know what MediaKits is, it's simply the easiest way to share your creator analytics. And what that means, and hence the name of the company, MediaKits, is traditionally MediaKits have been used for decades, even centuries, to pitch yourself to a publisher as an advertiser. And from when it comes to personal branding, I've been well aware of MediaKits for the past 5 years, ever since I even launched my podcast. Where if I'm trying to do a brand deal, they're going to ask me for my media kit. They want to see, who I am, my bio, my past episodes on my show, my past work, my, publications I've been featured in, whatever it may be. But little background and backstory on media kits and really how the idea came to fruition was my business partner and I, Kieran, back in this was like 2018. One of our best friends, his name is JR Garage. He's a big automotive YouTuber. He came to us. We're all from Virginia, for context, and we're all good friends. Just met on social media back in 2017. But he came to us and was like, "Hey guys, Pennzoil reached out to me to do a brand deal. They saw some of my automotive content. You guys are in marketing. Can you guys build me a media kit?" So, we're like, "Oh, what's a media kit?" So we do our research. We ended up building him one on Canva or Photoshop, or, taking screenshots of his YouTube channel and asking him for his Instagram screenshot analytics. Build him a little media kit. Takes a couple hours. We send it to him. He gets the brand deal. And then about 2 months later, he hits us back and is like, "Hey guys, Ferrari contacted me. They want to fly me down to Daytona Beach, Florida to do this big brand deal and activation. Can you update my media kit? Because since then I've had a video go viral. I've changed my profile picture, my username, all my stats are different. So can you update this?" So we're like, "Sure." We go ahead and update it. We're changing twos to threes and five to sixes when it comes to the analytics. And that's when we really had this light bulb moment. We're like, why isn't there a way for creators to easily build a media kit that never gets outdated, that you can easily share through a link?
Hmm.
And that was the moment we're like, we should go build this. And at the time we were both pursuing different things. We were still living in Virginia, didn't necessarily have the time or resources, so we shelved the idea. And that brings me back to what I brought up just a moments ago, which was back in 2020. We were roommates. TikTok started really blowing up. You see influencers like Charlie D'Amelio and Addison Rae like being minted as celebrities overnight.
Literally.
And we're like, wow, this is, I think this is a good time to go build this. The creator economy is growing year over year. Now from the podcast, I have all these relationships. If we want to go raise money, like, let's go do this.
Hmm.
And then we just started building, hiring the developer, getting a designer. And then we ended up launching last August. We had this big launch party here in LA. Wiz Khalifa performed. We had like
Yep.
600 different creators there. Awesome thing. The one thing important to note was, and we talk about this with everyone that we speak to, is like the first 2 months post launch, like it was a disaster, right? Like we had bugs with the product. There was things that we needed to fix. We had some international developers that we were working with, and after like a month and a half of fixing these bugs, I guess you could say we technically like relaunched mid October. And from there, we've really just been on this stride of launching new integrations. We just launched Twitch yesterday, and we have hundreds of streamers loving what we're doing in terms of being able to showcase their Twitch data. We have hundreds of different creators messaging us every other day, just saying like, "Hey, thank you so much. This helped me get a brand deal. This advertiser loved it." And for me as a founder, I am so excited about what we're doing because I also get pitched all the time for people to be on my podcast, and people send me their media kits and all this stuff. So like I'm so in the creator space myself as a podcaster and as someone that has been in it for years, that the tool we're building, I believe, it's the right time with the creator economy. And yeah, we're just super excited about it. We have an incredible team, and it's only the beginning, so we're pumped.
Dude, I'm super excited for you. And I know that a big buzzword now is like ownership. Everybody's talking about the future of ownership on the internet. And I just think this is like really allowing content creators to just take ownership of their careers, of the content they're putting out, and really be able to, broker their own deals because, you guys are just making it much easier to share, like specifically their reach, their analytics, what they have accomplished online, in an easy to view ways. So I'm really proud and excited for you, man. This is super
Thank
cool. I
you.
love the idea. I've loved it for a while, and the product, I mean, it's exceptional. It looks great. And I'm excited for more people to learn more about MediaKits.
Thank you so much, Landon. I
Yeah.
appreciated that. And even just last thing too on media kits, I think like in terms of the future, how we think about it, it's something that there's multiple avenues of creators, right? There's musicians, there's podcasters, there's
Mhm.
athletes, there's Twitch streamers that we're just super excited to help all of these creators organize their cross-platform data in one singular place. And I think if we can do that, we can help the creator economy overall. So yeah, we're excited, and I appreciate you for checking it out, and just following the journey.
Of course, man. No, no, no. I'll be following it more. Like, I'm really excited for you guys and appreciate you joining the show. This was a lot of fun, man. Just allowing people to hear about your personal journey, everything you've been able to accomplish, your personal advice for building a brand, and also what we can expect from you in the future. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Landon.